Hello, everyone. Hope all of you all are doing well. We still have more participants joining us. So meanwhile, the ones who are in our session, you could use the chat box, you could introduce yourself, let us know where you're coming from, and let me know if you're able to use the chat box. We're looking forward to see all of your responses in the chat box. We will start in a bit. Great. I can see some responses. It's good to see you all here. Right. Morning to those who are coming from Dubai. I can see people from Qatar. We have someone from Belgium. Great. Can we have more participants joining us, introducing themselves? So we will begin probably in a minute. We have more participants joining us. Okay, so until we have our participants joining, we can begin. So hello to all the inquisitive minds and enthusiastic learners. Welcome to another interesting Ignite session by Westwood for Business. For those who are joining our session for the first time, let me introduce myself. I'm Upasana Nambiar, Training Coordinator at Westwood for Business and your host. And also, let me just quickly brief you on WFB IGNITE. This is a series of online workshops and webinars organized by Westwood for Business. These sessions aim to provide virtual training solutions to bridge the competency gaps within organizations in the best way possible, primarily to address critical issues within the organizational context through professional development programs. WFB Ignite sessions are designed to be relevant and responsive to the current business trends and business needs around the world. And these sessions are led by WFB trainers who are professionals and consultants with years of industry experience. So moving on to today's WFB Ignite session is on lateral thinking for solving business challenges in digital world. And the session is facilitated by Dr. Heather Good. Dr. Heather is an accomplished higher education educator, research supervisor, and manager with a special focus on education and business. She serves as a faculty member at business schools, where she lectures, provides faculty development support, postgraduate research supervision, and coaching to returning adults. Dr. Heather holds a doctorate in education and has authored several accredited articles. Currently, she's converting her doctorate into a book that is expected to be published later this year. Additionally, Dr. Heather fulfills governance responsibilities at various institutions. So before I hand over the session to Dr. Heather, I would like to remind you all to feel free to send in your comments, suggestions, and feedback over the chat box. And you may please post your session-related questions under the Q&A segment down below. So without further ado, let me please invite Dr. Heather to kickstart this exciting session on lateral thinking for solving business challenges in the digital world. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Upasana. It's always nice to be introduced. You feel better about who you are as a person entirely. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. So as you heard today's topic, we're going to focus in on lateral thinking. And specifically, we're going to look at lateral thinking in the context of how we can use it in the business world. So we're going to start with what is lateral thinking. We're going to look at using lateral thinking for problem solving. We're going to just talk about the complexity of the challenges and therefore why lateral thinking might be appropriate. How we can use this for culture, for a culture of innovation, creativity, linking this to organizational objectives through SMART goals, and then just considering how all of this leads us to something a little bit more innovative. So let's start at the beginning. What is lateral thinking? So when you hear the term lateral thinking, what do you think lateral thinking is? You're welcome to just pop it into the chat. Sorry, I'm just checking your responses as we go. So when we look at lateral thinking, we've got to give credit to an author called Edward de Bono, who was one of the first people to mention this in a significantly strategic way as he proceeded. And when he referred to lateral thinking, he described it as a way of solving problems through an indirect and creative approach. So sometimes this is the method that is non-linear, unexpected, divergent, and would drive the very logical linear people unsettled. So if you're not used to lateral thinking, if you don't know how to move appropriately between rational linear thinking and lateral thinking, it sometimes feels very challenging. I've included on screen a definition by the Encyclopedia Britannica on lateral. Now, lateral is a word that is used as coming from the side. Now, normally, when we approach a problem, we try and approach it head on. We've all been told facing your problems is the best way to solve them. And yet, when that doesn't work, what can you do? So lateral thinking is a solution-based series of processes that can allow you to get a different perspective on your problem and approach it differently with more creativity and use relationships and associations that might not be immediately obvious to you, but allows you to generate different solutions. And they may be just as valid as a more logical, just a linear approach. So when we look at lateral thinking, why is lateral thinking relevant in today's business approach? So Divya, you absolutely mentioned the response, think outside the box. You do realize that means we assume there is a box. And this is the beauty of lateral thinking. Lateral thinking tests assumptions and tests what we know about problems. So some people use brainstorming as a way of getting to lateral thinking, but brainstorming is normally fairly linear as well. So we can look at lateral thinking as having 4 approaches and 4 pillars as we proceed. Sorry, let me just go back. So when we look at it, is look at your problem and then look at what are you assuming about your problem. That's kind of the first step. What are the problem's dominant ideas? What do you perceive about the problem? What are you assuming about the problem? So I challenged Divya of, is there a box? This is something we have to think about. And the second pillar involves searching for new ways to look at the problem. The third part of the approach is to let go of rigid thinking rules so that we can apply new alternative perceptions. Now, these rigid thinking rules are not in and of themselves bad, but if you are very concerned about giving the right answer, you may limit yourself. So giving yourself permission to give bad answers is sometimes very useful to look at different solutions. In fact, I was listening to a series of talks on creativity and problem solving, and they pointed out how bad ideas can lead to very good ideas. And if you let yourself just put ideas on the table, you actually generate a flow of more ideas along the way. Now, lateral thinking is very relevant to us today because we are facing contexts and problems that people before us haven't faced. There are some things we are facing that are common, and then we can go to history and people's experience and biographies and the way to approach problems as a great place to start. But when you are dealing with rapid technology changes, just take the rollout of AI, mobile always on technology, wicked problems, the complexity of problems that we are facing, the need for adaptability and resilience. And we can just think back to the pandemic and the challenges we faced there that hadn't been faced for over 100 years. Lateral thinking gives us a different tool in our toolboxes when we face problems. And the good thing about having different tools in your toolboxes is you get to have options when your favorite tools don't work. So lateral thinking is very relevant for when we get stuck. Lateral thinking is very relevant for when our assumptions make us repeat patterns of behavior that lead us to repeating what we've done before. So lateral thinking is a tool that can get us out of the rut, if I can call it that. So what type of problems do you think we are encountering in today's business world? Any ideas? What type of problems are we solving? Please pop this into the chat because I'd like to use some of the things you're facing within our discussion today. So Hera, you mentioned thinking differently. Yep. Lateral thinking helps you freshen your thinking approaches to problems. But what problems are we seeing in the world today? I've mentioned a couple already. Oh, implementing digitization. Oh, very much so. Very much so. And that has unexpected impacts as well. Business transformation, yes, definitely. So I mentioned the rapid technological change that we are facing, and absolutely that does lead us to the challenges that you are mentioning. Maintaining quality customer relationships, yes. Being connected to your customers is more important than ever. The digital social media world, fraught with challenges and missteps, but also enormous potential, and would also help with maintaining good customer relationships. Definitely. Any other ideas from anybody? Changing people's mindset. And you mentioned the technology implementation. So you're dealing with change management a lot. And also allowing people to open up to new problems, very, very definitely. So managing people and allowing people to change their minds is something that perhaps has to be developed. I'm seeing here balancing humanitarian rights, both economic and socio-political. Yes, That is part of the complexity of what we call wicked problems. So when you look at all of these things together and you realize that solving one problem sometimes causes another problem, you can see that we are dealing with very complex problems. And so the term wicked problems has emerged to describe that. We are dealing with problems that are interdisciplinary in nature. One type of expert is not enough. I'm seeing here as comment, the paradigm shift in the business system models. Yeah, what we used to do is insufficient. The knowledge paradigms we had is not sufficient for solving the current problems. We're seeing a lot of challenges to human burnout, wellness, all of those things. And that's often linked to the human technology challenges. So when you talked about changing people's mindset of technology and people's reactions to technology, that's part of the human technology interface that we need to engage with. What are we assuming about technology? Where should the guardrails be? What should we control? What should we not control? Who's allowed to have access to my data? Damn it, and I want to know what they're doing with it. I'm a client. Tell me what they're doing with it. We're dealing with a lot of marketing and branding changes. You mentioned the social media just now. Yes. We really have to learn how to be consistent with the brands that we are trying to represent. And also that human sensitivity around that. So not exploitative, not manipulated, but definitely, oh, Rhea, I see you're very happy about the cybersecurity and privacy challenges. Yes. And it's interesting how the practical aspects of that can affect your brand. We've seen some companies misstep very badly there. We're looking at rapid change. There's a lot of uncertainty about certain things. The geopolitical challenges, and in that I'm going to include the war in the Ukraine, the war between Palestine and Israel at the moment, the uncertainty about who's getting involved where, and the volatility that brings, the disruption of supply chains. I know, for examples, in parts of the Middle East and Africa right now, there are internet challenges and Microsoft services were offline because of cables being cut and damaged. One was a set that was due to explosions, and the other was possibly due to some, they were talking about people who dug up a road and damaged cables in the process. Ouch, pulling half the continent offline, quite hectic. So technology, yes, I see in the chat the monetary challenges. We've got to do more with less. How do we do more with less? Yes, challenge. And then let us not forget the bigger context of our climate. And whether we like it or not, the ignoring of the impact of industrialization on the climate is catching up with us. And anybody who's over a certain age will be able to tell you that seasons were colder when they were growing up and warmer in summer and different. The wet weather patterns have shifted, the currents have shifted, and the water levels are changing. In some areas there's receding, in other areas there's increase. And what will the impact be on weather, crops, and wildlife, and where we can live if the climate continues to get more volatile? Some of you are directly affected. I know, for example, the monsoon season in India is getting a little more unpredictable. What does that mean for your supply of raw materials? What does it mean if your supply chain of raw materials is disrupted with the political uncertainty and the weather? Our ability to respond resiliently is very, very challenging. So I'm going to come back to the point about, is there a box? Now, we've been taught there's a box. And very young, we take our children to school and the teachers teach them to color in the lines of the pictures. And if they don't comply, they're not necessarily seen as creative, but as willful and disrespectful. So if you've had 12 years of schooling or 13 years of schooling, depending which schooling system you're in, you've taught children to color inside the lines. Some of my colleagues in higher education feel that the biggest challenge we deal with is undoing some of the compliance mindset that is enforced and developing critical thinking in our students today. How do we teach people to question in a way that is respectful? Because some of our teachers are not trained to deal with being questioned, especially in more authoritarian climates of education. The other thing is, how do we tap into our intuition? We've seen in the last 50 years the rise of the scientific method and the rise of the positivist evidence-based approach. And I'm not saying that's wrong. It's been terribly useful and terribly relevant to advancing our technology. But prioritizing the scientific approach reduced the voice of creatives and invalidated the voice of people's intuition. Now, you may hear from some people, I wish I'd trusted my gut more. And it doesn't mean that your instincts are wrong. Logic doesn't help us when we are facing a choice between two equally good options on paper. You can do as many pros and cons as you like. And it is in that space we need to explore intuition. And how do we use our intuition? So if I have to, and I'm just going to pop this into the poll if I can, let me just see. If you'll give me a moment, I'll just rebroadcast. There we go. I'm going to pop into the chat. What do we need to solve problems in a business context? Intuition, logic, both intuition and logic, creativity, persistence. Which of those do you think we need to solve problems in a business context? Can I choose all of them? So I'm seeing both intuition and logic. Somebody else is saying all. I feel like I'm preaching to the converted this morning. Yes, we probably look at needing all. I'm intrigued to see so much agreement in the chat. So we've come a long way. I think in the last 5 years, we have as a society experienced several disruptive, and when I say disruptive, I mean paradigm disruptive, societal disruptive, cultural disruptive experiences. And I suspect that's why you are all going with all. And I'm seeing a very interesting comment about resourcefulness as well. So when we are looking at this, we have been faced with situations where logic was insufficient to solve the problems. And we've realized the value of creativity. We've realized the value of intuition. But what we haven't fully explored is how to bring them together. And so in this way, I'm going to give you back the box, but as a toolkit, as a way of expressing lateral thinking. So in the digital age, which is very logical, sometimes it feels very binary, we can apply lateral thinking. So just to fully disclose, this image was developed by DALL-E through ChatGPT-4, and it just was a way to help me present a coherent image through what some of the idioms we use for lateral thinking and creativity, thinking outside the box, the colorfulness, using multiple tools, breaking free from the mold, connecting the dots, all of those things, using lights, different analogies coming together in one image. So when we look at these sorts of things, You know, programs and even AI can only do what you tell it to do. This is the beauty of humans. And so one of the things I want to bring to you for consideration today is what key principles of the debate do you think? Where is the line drawn? What can humans do that machines or AI or programs can't? What can humans do that the machines we've made can't? I'm seeing emotional inputs. Feel. Yes. Empathy. You are so right. They can't sympathize and empathize, definitely. Respond differently. Yes. Lateral thinking. Thank you for being relevant to my workshop, Abdul. Appreciate that. So when we look at things like lateral thinking, idea generation, care, nurture, empathy, sympathy, build machines. Actually, we use robots to build machines, so build new machines maybe. Ethical decisions, well, we can program ethical decisions. Humans can surpass expectations. Wow, yes. So what careers do you think from this? The smile, thank you, Hira. So what careers do you see then that are safe from the rise of digital AI robots, programs? It's going to be things like teaching, nursing, creativity, idea generation, entrepreneurship, breaking the molds, things that haven't been done before, solving problems humans haven't solved before. So we know that AI and generative AI in particular have only been trained on the existing content of books and the internet. And there's a lot of debate about copyright infringement and all of those things. And that's perhaps a subject for another webinar. There's a lot of debate about emerging competencies and hallucinations. But the reality is they are limited. And now if you look at the word artificial intelligence, it's by definition imitators of humans. Now, thanks to the advances in chip technology, both robots and AI can work faster than some human brains to solve some problems. But to evaluate their output, to make their output better, humans are still required. So when we look at the key principles of lateral thinking, one of the things we can do is see that lateral thinking allows us to leverage off the advantages humans still bring to the human technology interface. I was very interested to see that this week Ethan Mollick has released his book Co-Intelligence, and it's about how AI can help make us more intelligent and how humans can collaborate with the digital age to do more and be smarter and work faster. Now, this might be the opportunity that we can explore for how do we do more with less, but also how do we do things differently? We're all aware of problems in society, in business, in technology even, where things are not the way we'd ideally like to be, even whether we evaluate ethically or by some moral code, equality, justice. These things are missing from several of the countries. Reconciliation and peace, I'm not sure that AI is going to take us down that road. So perhaps working collaboratively with technology might be useful. But lateral thinking then becomes very, very useful. So when we look at the picture here, I'm trying to show that in a business content, we now have access to information at an unprecedented rate. your ability to access ideas, resources, thinking, and information is overwhelming. So maybe the most useful thing you can do is learn how to make sense of it and learn how to use it to generate new ideas. Now, in an international business context, you will see a globe there and several things that could represent a very diverse brainstorming suggestion. The light bulb has traditionally been used to show the brain coming to light, and the sparks of information, the butterfly for the butterfly effect in chaos theory, connecting ideas, different contexts. What do you see in this image that speaks to you of lateral thinking in a business context? We've got a book recommendation in the chat, Deep Thinking. Yes, and this book is even more useful when you think about who the author is and what he achieved. I'm also going to refer you to people like Adam Grant, Think Again. He's got a good book, and his latest is also very interesting. So one of the things about this image that I see, and I'm speaking creatively here, is I see a bringing together of colors and ideas. If you look at several things, it's sometimes hard to see everything that's going on until you start separating out the patterns and the colors. Even the linear ideas are helpful here in this image, but they're only part of the picture. So I'm seeing in the chat, there's so many options, challenging assumptions. Yes, exploring alternatives. I think one of the biggest limits to our current problem-solving ability, and I'm including myself in this, is what assumptions we make. And I have to stop myself sometimes and say, what am I assuming about a problem? And one of the ways I identify my assumptions is I read something or listen to someone I would normally disagree with. And it could be for various reasons that I would disagree with them. I don't like what they have to say. But what is interesting is having a debate or reasoning against a position you disagree with can clarify your own thinking. So that would link to the exploring alternatives that was mentioned. So courage to make the impossible possible. There's no limitations. Yeah, I think there are less limitations than we think. We may be constrained by our resources and our current knowledge, but if you include in your problem-solving process the ability to learn, that constraint can be lifted. So how do we engage with this a little bit more? So yes, I'm seeing a lot of connection with the idea of a lack of limits. The reality is sometimes in the problem process, especially with complex and enduring problems, we can get tired. And one of the things that sounds very counterintuitive, but sometimes to solve a problem, you shouldn't work harder. You should go and have a good nap or a rest or do something creative. When I was doing my doctorate, I found it fascinating that by stepping away and engaging in a creative project, distracting my mind, my unconscious and subconscious was working on a problem. And the next day, when I came back to my dissertation and problem solving, I actually was able to solve my problem better with a fresh perspective. And I made connections I hadn't seen a mere day or two before. Engaging visually in a problem that you are conceptualizing is very, very helpful. Asking for other people's perspectives is very, very helpful. Perhaps you can follow these sorts of things in problem solving. So you could challenge existing assumptions. What are you assuming about the problem? What is your competitors assuming about the problem? What is the conventional wisdom? What is the consequence of that assumption? We can test our assumptions. What is an alternative assumption? I like this one when we're solving problems. Think in reverse. What if we do exactly the opposite of what we think we should do? What would emerge? So this can lead to unorthodox solutions. So if you were trying to increase sales, what happens if you limited the availability of your product? Well, from economics, we know that if you limit the availability of your product, it becomes scarce. And scarcity can lead to a value increase or a revaluation. Scarcity, we discovered in the pandemic when we didn't have access to our normal suppliers, it led us to alternative supplies, new ways to do things. And then we can choose which one was better. So you've heard begin with the end in mind. Well, what if you started at the end and said, what's a different way to get here? When you're planning a holiday and let's assume you're driving there and you find out that the road is blocked due to an accident or roadworks, what do? To get to the same destination, you take a different route. So start with the destination and what's another route you could take to get there? Which one is better based on which constraint? You can explore those ideas. You can use random input. So this one is really good for breaking a stalemate. You can get random word generators, random image generators, random concept generators, and you can just ask somebody, for example, in the room, give me the main theme of a movie you saw last week, and then you can relate it back to your problem. This can break a thinking pattern or a stuckness that we sometimes get into. So if your random word is elephant and your problem is related to storage solutions, you might go to the elephant trunk. You might think about large, scalable, portable storage system. You might think of a strong storage system given the strength of elephants. Perhaps you will think about what an elephant can travel with, and it might lead you, how can we use that to store things differently? How can we create clusters similar to a herd of elephants? Just use random inputs and explore that going forward. Now, you could employ analogical thinking. This is analogical. We ask, what is analogicalous? What is similar is probably the more recent term you've heard. So you may hear, what has the competitors done? What has other people done? What if we were in a different industry? What would be done? So when you look at the analogous thinking, look at what's similar. Is there an idea or a solution from one context that can be adapted to another context? Any comments on that? All right, the fifth option is explore, escape your thinking box. Sometimes you can literally put a box on the table and put your assumptions in it and say, right, close the box, now think around those things. What are the limits you're seeing? And escape your thinking box. So exploring your thinking can be quite helpful. What is helpful to you? Escape your thinking problems. Get people you wouldn't necessarily include in your brainstorming. So executives are terrible. They always put the same people in the room to solve problems. What if you included somebody from every team who's never been in a session with you from brainstorming and see what they come up with? What if you include people from other countries and diverse backgrounds to contribute ideas? This can help you break out of groupthink. Include people you wouldn't normally include. Very, very useful. Now, fractionalization, this is when we actually use fractions or break things down into smaller parts. When we're dealing with wicked problems, they're very complex. And as much as we'd like to solve the whole problem, perhaps we can solve a part of the problem. Think about breaking it down into a smaller piece. How do we solve the part of the problem? Now, this has several advantages. The one is, in solving part of the problem, you may hit a point of leverage that is able to come forward into solving more parts of the problem when it's reassembled. So you may create an efficiency when you deal with a part, and it also feels more doable. It also gives you a quicker win. So when people are feeling demotivated about not being able to solve a whole problem, being able to make progress on a smaller problem is very, very useful. So fractionalization is very useful when you feel overwhelmed and don't know what to do. Solve a small part of the problem and go forward from there. Now, this may come as a surprise, but critical thinking can be very effective with lateral thinking. So when I define critical thinking, yes, here fractionalization gives motivation, definitely. So critical thinking seems very linear because we've been talking about lateral thinking, but actually critical thinking is a process. And it involves asking appropriate questions, gathering and creatively sorting through information, relating new information to existing knowledge, re-examining beliefs, testing your assumptions, reasoning, and drawing reliable conclusions. And you can see how lateral thinking and critical thinking would help you break patterns of thought. So when we know the connections between ideas, and that can be very logical, critical thinking can allow us to test the assumptions of the links between those ideas and look for alternative pieces. So when we are looking at critical thinking, it's a way of exploring a problem more comprehensively. So by exploring it more comprehensively and building in multiple perspectives, when you add lateral thinking to critical thinking, you not only have a more robust thinking process, but the multiple perspectives in critical thinking can help you approach the problem from a new perspective where you can use lateral thinking as well. So this is very, very useful as embedded in your process. So I'm not saying be less rigorous when you use lateral thinking. In fact, if you put it together with critical thinking, this is very, very important. So the two together can give us a more balanced approach. The rigor of the process means that we consider everything more thoroughly, but we also test the reasoning in our thinking when it's lateral and we're choosing solutions. Good critical thinking and good lateral thinking can reduce bias because it challenges our assumptions about people, about problems, and about society. So you can use critical thinking with lateral thinking to reduce bias. The two together allows you to take in different perspectives, test your thinking, and approach problems from different perspectives more systematically. And it's kind of obvious how that would help in a problem-solving process. Another recommendation is to integrate systems thinking with lateral thinking. Now, systems thinking is a holistic approach to analysis that focuses on the way the system relates to itself. So if you think of an organization or a supply chain, or the relationship between customers, a company, and its suppliers as a system, considering how the system relates to each other is very, very important. This would allow you to identify how systems work over time and how things are impacted. So if one of your suppliers has a supply chain problem, that's going to impact you and your customers. So this helps us think about what is flowing through the system. One of the things that we need to explore is information flows. How is information handed from the supplier to your organization to your customer? What should be communicated? What should not be communicated? What needs to stay in-house? What should be shared? What should be aggregated data? What should be private data? When we look at systems thinking, we can look at the points of impact. What are the consequences of certain changes? We know in systems thinking that the impact of one thing cannot be considered in isolation. It affects more than one thing. You may change the email system, and I've used this example before for those of you who've listened to me before. When you change the email system, you change how people work, how they organize their communications with others, and data might be lost in the migration. So considering the impact of the system, you might be able to mitigate one problem and create another. So anticipating consequences is an important part of strategy. And this is where systems thinking can really help. The other thing systems thinking can help you do is stand in a different space. And that allows you to see different perspectives and different points of leverage. When things are connected to each other, sometimes you do one small thing and it has multiple effects. It allows us to look at things like opportunity costs and what the unintended consequences might be. So systems thinking with lateral thinking allows us to look in a multidimensional space. And sometimes this can be creating a 3D flowchart and rotating it and looking at it from a different perspective. And it gives us a different understanding of complexity. Deliberately learning how to engage with systems thinking, examining impacts and flows, leverage and opportunity costs, allows you to anticipate consequences a little bit more thoroughly. Lateral thinking, with its focus on looking at diverse perspectives while considering the whole system, can allow you to see it from your customer's perspective, anticipate it from your supplier's perspective, anticipate it from your competitor's perspective, sorry. And it allows you to move through the system to see solutions you might not have before. And a systems thinking approach allows a sense of resilience. And just like the motivation of the other ideas, resilience, knowing that the whole system is not broken when there's a problem with a part, can allow you to think about flexible alternatives. What else can we put in here? The good thing about systems is they adapt. So in the environment, when you change something, they adapt, they recover, there's resilience. So this idea of systems thinking can bring in new perspectives. So we've looked at lateral thinking, we've looked at systems thinking, we've looked at critical thinking, we've looked at thinking outside the box, we've looked at using creativity and different perspectives to change what's going on. Which brings us to the organization's goals. So you've often heard the term that an organization should set SMART goals. What are SMART goals? How do you know your goals are SMART? Well, sometimes we look at the words of specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, specific. We can look at measurable, measurability, integratability. When we evaluate the goals in the digital landscape of today, the fourth moving into the fifth industrialized revolution, our timelines have to be careful. So when you look at the T for time, we need to have goals that flex into different timelines. We need to have goals that are specific and yet flexible. They are able to engage differently with goals. So When we look at SMART goals in the context of lateral thinking, how you phrase a goal may motivate people or disassociate people. When you look at a goal and it doesn't feel achievable or relatable, it's not relevant to your whole business. And so it may be smarter to reconceptualize the goal creatively in a way that gets people attention and motivates them. So one question to ask is, how can lateral thinking help you make your goals more precise, more creative, and more invigorating? You may look at how can your goals give you data-driven insights, measurability. Sometimes we get a lot of data and we don't do anything with that data. What insights are available in the system of our business? And how can we use those insights within a systems context to find the points of leverage to set goal actions that help us achieve our outcomes more easily? Find the points of leverage, the points of impacts, the points of flow, and figure out what the best goals are. Now, the challenge with technology innovation and the rapid change in technology is sometimes people get so fixated on using what is newest, they forget to evaluate what is most appropriate. So engage in these goals and think about, are we using appropriate goals and appropriate technology to achieve those goals? Are we upskilling our staff with the appropriate technologies? How can we use technology to complement, collaborate, and make people smarter? Hera, yes, you mentioned seeing the requirement, not just the trend. So these are some of my thoughts about setting more SMART goals with lateral thinking in mind, being more creative about them, exploring them holistically, looking at different perspectives. How might different people respond to your goals in the organization? What problems are you solving? Is more always better? I see some organizations just setting increasing sales goals year after year. That's just the same old, same old. What are you assuming? Why do you think more is better? What's enough? How do we improve quality instead of quantity? How do we improve customer experience instead of quantity? What's the optimum number of customers for our organization to maximize customer satisfaction? Can we answer those questions? More is not always better. So with these sorts of things in mind, that's just some of the thoughts I wanted to share with you on the chat. On the topic given today, we only have an hour. So I'm going to go to any questions at this time. I see there's one question in the Q&A. Apasna, perhaps we want to just open some of the chats. Okay, I'm seeing one or two questions, but I'm going to go to just the question in the chat. Okay, that was going into the digital social media world. I think we spoke about that. Any comments from your side before we answer the questions in the chat?
It was a wonderful session. And we have one question from Divya right here. Can the unconventional nature of lateral thinking lead to unpredictable outcomes?
I think it can. So lateral thinking can give us new outcomes, new ways of doing, new perspectives. But if you bring it then back into being properly harnessed with critical thinking and systems thinking, you can predict the outcomes and take it through a rigorous, more robust process. So lateral thinking gets us out of our assumptions. That doesn't mean we always walk away from testing the new assumptions or the new perspectives that we are using. If you're taking an evidence-based approach, take an evidence-based approach with lateral thinking as well. It's just a way of, it's just one stage of the problem solving. So it can but only when it's not well applied. So you start with lateral thinking, maybe you don't finish there. Any other
Great.
questions?
Yes, we have one more question. How can the use of effective lateral thinking for change management?
Well, I think when you look at change management, you are absolutely trying to transition people from what was to what is and what you want things to be. And that means you've got to let go of something. And lateral thinking can be a more creative, less threatening way for people to see multiple perspectives, engage more creatively, relieve frustration, and yet contribute to solutions. And so I think lateral thinking exercises can help you find new ways to communicate change, can help you find new perspectives on change, and certainly can maybe get more buy-in on change, especially if you use a multiple perspectives approach. It allows people to feel seen and heard, and that gets more buy-in. So if you include people who would not normally be included in the decision-making process, it may feel like you are giving a lot more voice to people who might not otherwise have been heard. And that kind of lateral thinking technique can reduce a sense of threat that change brings.
Right. I think we have one more question from the same person. That's Akhil Mohanan. Lateral
Yes.
thinking opportunity for cost reduction at manufacturing.
Yes, I think it can be used to reduce cost because remember, you're testing your assumptions. So if you remember the example I used of fractionalization, if you break things down, what can you do differently at a reduced cost? Is there another way of getting the same output with a different supply input? Is there another supplier? What are we assuming in our manufacturing process? All of those bring some cost issues to light and can be used in that way.
Great. We have a question from Jacob Nelson. Going
Mm-hmm.
forward, as we will witness a larger input of automated chatbots and machine learning, do you think lateral thinking will be affected?
Yes. And I'm going to say it depends. So it's fascinating me at the moment that the people who are most critical of the output of AI are the people who've learned to think better and have multiple tools in their hands. And at the same time, the people who are getting the most out of collaborating with generative AI are the people who are best equipped to work without AI. So I'll give you an example. When you already know what works, getting 3 random ideas from AI on how to approach a problem can give you a lateral thinking approach. But your experience can help you evaluate that output more thoroughly. So I think we need to use AI creatively. And I'll give you an example. I used an image earlier. And one of the things this image did was I asked DALL-E and through ChatGPT to give me an image of lateral thinking that refers to some idioms. And the bringing together of it freshened my thinking and inspired me when I was thinking about this workshop. I used it to help me think laterally. So the question is more, how can we use the tools to support our critical, creative, systemic, and lateral thinking? And that might be a much more useful question to ask. And I'm just going to put a hashtag, I'm still learning this one.
That was great. And we have a question from Saman Deshwari. How to handle conflict of interest in thinking when it is teamwork?
Yeah. No, I think that happens a lot. And I think this is sometimes the problem of groupthink. And this is when some of these strategies, when there's conflicts of interest, challenging your existing assumptions. You know, Stephen Covey, and this is years ago, he wrote that book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of his habits is think win-win. When you look at conflicts of interests in teamwork, you are suggesting there is a win-lose. So maybe the question is, guys, how can we shift our problem solving to win-win? So lateral thinking might break that negative cost benefit win-lose or lose-lose scenario.
Right. Next up, we have a question from Hira. Does the timeline matter to see the results of lateral thinking? Sometimes it can be time-taking, bringing long-term sustainable change in the system.
Oh, yes. So I would agree with your comment about long-term sustainable change. I think by definition. So it depends on what problem you're trying to solve. Now, I have applied lateral thinking in my own life to see personal benefits immediately. You know, if I break a habit or change the way I look at a problem, I can carry it with me immediately. But problem solving, the timeline of the problem and the length of time to impact is you may see some short-term results, some medium-term results, and some long-term results. And that's the nature of our actions. So depending on the problem you're solving, if it took you 20 years to create the problem, you're probably not going to get an overnight solution. But maybe you can apply lateral thinking to help you get results in the short and medium term to also get a sense of progress. I think we're out of time, am I right?
Yes, maybe we can just take up, there's, I think, 2 more questions. So once
Two
we are
more
done with
questions.
that, then we can find
Fantastic.
out. So
Yeah. Last
can
question.
lateral thinking be applicable as well with SWOT analysis?
I don't see why not. So do a SWOT analysis and see what insights you get there. And then maybe you ask everybody, guys, how are these strengths also weaknesses to us? How are our weaknesses, opportunities, and strengths for us? Now, I like the idea that characteristics of a person, of an organization, have both strengths and weaknesses to them. Maybe it helps you reveal your assumptions about certain things. So maybe do a SWOT analysis and during the process, ask lateral thinking type questions to allow you to explore it more deeply.
Great. And we have another question. Would lateral thinking be effective if senior management is using the traditional approach to resolving issues? How would you influence the senior management to embrace lateral thinking?
This is a change management problem, but also, do you know what? People are open to things that they see working. So you may make a very formal presentation to management on solving a problem. How you get to your solutions and recommendations, you can embed lateral thinking processes and creative processes. And when people, and especially senior management, see something that's working, they tend to buy in and become curious about that process. I don't think that lateral thinking is a tool for every situation, but like having a toolbox and choosing the most appropriate tool for the task at hand, having a toolbox is as valuable. And understanding their perspectives may be part of the multiple perspectives of lateral thinking that you can use.
Right. And one last question before we end the session. What are the tools needed to make lateral thinking a broad-based trend without a win-lose scenario?
Sure. I think lateral thinking is a tool, it's a process that we unpack. And I think it should be one of the tools, not necessarily a trend. I'm seeing a rise in the effectiveness of lateral thinking, mostly because, to quote, I think it's Peter Drucker, the thinking we use to solve our problems is probably not going to solve the current organizational situation. So that's a terrible paraphrase, I'm sorry. But I think lateral thinking can break our assumption ruts that we get into. And maybe our lateral thinking can shift our lazy thinking. You know, sometimes it's easier to stick with what you know. And if lateral thinking shifts that, then maybe you can shift the idea of a win-lose scenario and start to explore the option. I mean, sometimes just asking, is there a win-win solution, allows you to consider something you haven't before. And so I recommend that writing by Stephen Covey on win-win. It just really helped shift my thinking of some of the opportunities available. I know the Harvard Business School has got a good write-up on negotiation about shifting from win-lose to win-win and why it's often necessary in negotiations.
Right, absolutely. So I think with that, we come to an end of the session. Thank you all for your time, interesting questions, enthusiasm, and participation in our session. And thank you to Dr. Heather for igniting us all by sharing your knowledge and experience with us. It was a refreshing session indeed. Dear learners, your suggestions and comments matter to us. So please do let us know your thoughts, suggestions for improvements, so we can continue to improve and give you the best service. So after the session, you will receive a feedback form, which will only take about 3 to 5 minutes to complete. And if you have opted for the certificate, you will receive your e-certificate within the day. You can publish that on LinkedIn as well. So see you again with another insightful WFB Ignite session. Until we meet again, thank you very much. Stay ahead, stay connected with Westwood for Business. Have a nice day ahead.
Thank you for the generous comments, and Diva, thank you for seeing the possibility of no box.
Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Bye.